Assalamu alaikum class. We are at lecture number 6. Today we're going to talk about further on the hypothesis development. Previously we did some exercises on how to write hypothesis statements. Today again we're going to further go into a little more detail on that. Let's start with today's session. Okay. But as we said earlier, let's recap onto what we did last time. We developed hypothesis statements. Some of these statements were directional, some were non-directional. Some of these statements had indicated a relationship between variables or identified a difference between groups. We also looked at how to write our null statements and alternate statements. Continuing with that, we're going to today talk about how there are different statistical notations used to represent the hypothesis statements, and which are then basically incorporated with our statistical tests. While testing the group difference, what we need to obtain is the mean of the focus variable. That is, if we are trying to see the motivation level of an employee, of a certain group of employees such as male or female, what we tend to do is obtain a mean of the mean motivation level of the employees. Either it's going to be a male or female, and the mean as notation is represented by the notation mu, basically. And when we try to see the difference between the two variables, difference between the two groups on a particular variable such as motivation, what we try to see is what is the mean motivation level of men and mean motivation level of women. So basically we try to get the mean motivation level of each group. So what we do is we tend to, trying to find out the difference between the two groups, we compare the means of the two groups. In that case, in our previous scenario, what we're looking at as to the mean motivation of women and mean motivation of men, then we try to compare the level of motivation, and basically we're trying to look at the mean motivation versus the mean motivation of women. So this is basically what we tend to do, and based on this is basically the mean, as we know, is obtained based on the data what we collect in our research. Of course the mean is going to be obtained a little bit later on when we collect the data, but while stating our hypothesis statements, the notations to represent what we are going to do and what sort of test we're going to play, we tend to use these notations to represent the relationships or the tests. As we said that what we do is we first state our null hypothesis. The idea behind stating the null hypothesis is that once we reject the null hypothesis, it's easier for us to substantiate our alternate hypothesis. For our null hypothesis, the statements what we made under null hypothesis statements, we said that there is no difference between the mean motivation level of men versus the mean motivation level of women. So we were saying there was no difference between the two groups, the mean difference between the mean motivation level of men versus the mean motivation level of women. So the null hypothesis, while we using the notations, we say H naught represents as the null hypothesis, and we're saying the mean motivation level of men minus the mean motivation level of women is equals to 0. If you remember, we said that a null hypothesis usually is stated in a format whereby it's trying to say that there is no relationship between two variables and there is no difference between the two groups. When we say there is no difference between the two groups, what do we mean by that? The difference between them is 0. So this is what it is. We're saying the mean motivation level, whatever that is, maybe of men, when we calculate that minus the motivation, minus the motivation, mean motivation level of women. When we differentiate, when we minus them together, basically the result will come to 0. That's what our null hypothesis statement is. We're saying the difference between the two groups is 0, or there is no difference between the two groups. So this is how you state your null hypothesis. Again, we use H naught as an indication of that this is a null hypothesis statement notation. Similarly, we said that in case for once we are able to state our null hypothesis, we also define our alternate hypothesis, which is opposite to the null hypothesis. And in this case, whatever the hypothesis, which is the alternate hypothesis we are going to define, is based on the prior knowledge or prior literature review we had done. Whatever that literature gives us the indication, we develop our alternate hypothesis on that. And there are one way of stating the null the hypothesis is that the alternate hypothesis statement is that we could say the mean motivation level of men is more than the mean motivation of women. So one of the way of stating the alternate hypothesis could be this, but again it depends on what is the what sort of literature support we have for that. Okay, if we have the literature support which suggests that the motivation level of men is more than women, or women is more than men, depending whatever stance, whatever direction you make, we are saying that the men have higher motivation level than women, or women have higher. This all depends on the literature, prior literature we had already surveyed. The notation for representing this is we say HA, which is representation of alternate hypothesis, and we're saying mu, motivation level of men, is greater than the motivation level of women. So we're saying the mean motivation level of men is greater than the motivation level, which is more than we're saying the motivation level of men is more than the motivation level, or greater, or so here we are giving what? A direction. We're giving a direction. Okay, so this is an example of a direction is given, correct? So we are here, we are stating in a form of the hypothesis statement, but we are also providing a direction in that hypothesis statement, the alternate statement. And this is, again, as said, is based on the literature. If there is literature which supports this, then we tend to use the direction kind of hypothesis statement. Another way of writing the same hypothesis statement, but does again depend on the literature, which prior literature we had, is we can say the mean motivation level of men is less than the mean motivation of women. Okay. Now, if the literature supports this, then we're saying that mean motivation level of men is less than mean motivation of women. Again, that's all depends on the kind of literature you had already reviewed and studied. If this literature supports this, then this is the way you are going to say. But nevertheless, this is also a way of, it's a directional way of writing your hypothesis statement. Okay. In case the literature is not conclusive as to whose motivation is more, that is, either men have more motivation or women have more motivation, if the literature does not support, it's inconclusive, it's not clearly present, then you also can write the statements in a way that it is what we call the non-directional way. And this is the way you write it. There is no difference between the mean motivation level of men and the mean motivation level of women. So we're saying there's no difference between, there's no difference between the two. They are equal. We're saying there is no difference between the two. If we are saying that there is a difference between the two groups. Okay, so when we're saying that there is a relationship between certain variables, There again, we are trying to establish that either it's positive directional, there is a difference, there is a relationship. It could be a positive relationship or a negative relationship, or in case the literature is not supporting, we say there is a relationship but you're not mentioning the direction. For that, the notation we use to indicate that there is a relationship is the term rho. Okay, this is the symbol we use to indicate that there is a correlation between certain variables, and it's what we call as a rho, and rho is denoted by a small p. So if we say we find that the correlation between the two variables is more, is positive one, which is this one. Is negative one, or equals to 0, or actually it should be not equals to 0, meaning we are saying that there is no there is a relationship, but you don't know that it's positive or negative. Let's look at this example in more in detail. What we are saying is that when we say there is a relationship between two variables, the value of p, which is the rho, is greater than 0, meaning it's a positive relationship, a negative relationship. And here we are saying that it's not equals to 0, meaning there is a relationship, but you're not sure it's positive or negative. So sorry, I have made a mistake here. It should have been no, not equals to 0. If it becomes equals to 0, then we are saying there is no relationship. But that is a case of null hypothesis. So please make sure this is not equal. Okay, the term, the symbol I should have used here is not equal to 0. So I'm saying these are all the cases of your alternate hypothesis statements, whereas when we say there is a null hypothesis statements, we're saying it's equals to 0. When we're saying the relationship positive, the relationship is negative, the relationship is non-directional. We're not sure that it could be positive, it could be negative. We're saying it's non-zero, which is if it's 0, then we're saying that there is no relationship. So there is a relationship, there is a relationship, and there is no relationship. So while considering the notations for hypothesis statements, the null hypothesis statements, especially in the case of relationships, we use the term, we use the notation rho, and we denote that we say rho is greater than 0, rho is less than 0, or rho is not equal to 0 to indicate alternate hypothesis statements. And for null hypothesis statements, we say rho is equals to 0. So this is for the null hypothesis statement. This is the notation for null hypothesis statement, and these are notations for your actual hypothesis statement or alternate hypothesis statement. So what we did here, we said the notation for group reference, we're saying it's more. Again more. Here we're using the word more. Okay, and we're saying less, and then we're saying they're not equals to 0. When they are equals to 0, when the difference between the two is equals to 0, then we're saying there is no difference. When we're saying they're not equal, meaning there is a difference between that, but you're not sure if this is greater or this is less. You're not sure, but you're saying they are different. Here you're saying they are different. You're different, but you're not saying either case. So this is non-directional. These are directional ways of saying there's a difference between the two groups. And let's look at the other one. And then we said there is a relationship between the two variables, and notation we use is we're saying rho is greater than 0, rho is less than 0, is not equal to 0. This is again for your alternate hypothesis statements. For null hypothesis statements, we are saying rho is equals to 0. Okay, so based on the available literature, we can have different alternates. As I said, H A represents that there is a positive relationship between, let's say, stress and job satisfaction. So if I were to use notations for that, statistical notation for that, this is the way you do that. We say HA colon rho is greater than 0. So if this is your hypothesis, there is a positive relationship. This is your statement. So this is a statement. This is a statement, hypothesis statement. The notation for that is this one, which is HA colon rho is greater than 0, because we're saying it's a positive relationship. When we say there is a negative relationship, if this is the statement, we're saying there is a negative relationship between stress and job satisfaction, then HA is equals to P is less greater than, let's see, we said greater than, yeah, P is less than 0, which is, we're saying it's negative. P is less than 0, we're saying P, value of P is less than, which is a negative relationship. And if the statement, we are saying the relationship between stress and job satisfaction, there is a relationship, we're saying, but we're not giving a direction. This is non-directional. So non-directional way of writing. We're saying this is non-directional way of writing, that the rho is not equal to 0, that there is a relationship, but you're not sure if it's positive or negative. In case it's negative, this is the symbol you use. In case it's positive, this is the symbol you use. So use greater than, P is greater than 0, P is less than 0, or rho is less than 0, or rho is more than 0, indicating a positive relationship, indicating a negative relationship. And in case it's inclusive, if the relationship is positive or negative. In some studies it's positive, in some studies it's negative. You're undecisive about it, then what you do is you say non-directional. You say the rho is not equal to 0, meaning it could be positive, it could be negative. Let's summarize the whole relationship in a table. What we have done is we have on the left side we have said that the types of statements could be directional, non-directional, and we said the type of relation, the kind of hypothesis statements could be relation or group difference based, and within the relationship we have the null hypothesis and the alternate hypothesis. Within the group difference we have the null hypothesis, the alternate hypothesis. So by combining the different formats, let's look at one at a time. So when we say we want to formulate directional hypothesis statements, in the case of between a relationship between two variables, the notations we use is we say the null hypothesis for a relationship, directional relationship, is we are saying the null hypothesis, which is H naught rho is equals to 0. And for alternate hypothesis we are saying that rho is greater than 0 or rho is less than 0. Whatever the scenario is, you could say it's greater than on or less than 0. If we want to see the directional hypothesis statements for group differences, between the group differences, we are saying for the null hypothesis we are saying the mean of the variable A is equals to the mean of variable B, meaning the difference between the two variables is equals to 0. That is the mean A, variable A, minus the mean variable B is equals to 0. And but this is what we use for our null hypothesis statement. For the alternate hypothesis statements, we are saying that the mean of variable A is greater than mean of variable B, or mean of variable of A is less than mean of variable B. In this case, again, we're saying that there is a difference in this case A is greater than B, the mean of A is greater than B. In this case we're saying the mean of A is less than mean of B. Going back again, let's look at again while we're looking at the directional relationship, the alternate hypothesis statements are these. Because they are directional and alternate hypothesis, we're saying that the relationship is positive or negative. If it's directional and hypothesis statements, alternate hypothesis statement, then we're saying the relationship positive or negative. Got it? So we are saying the mean difference is more or less, the difference is greater or lesser, positive or negative. We're saying positive or negative. We are saying greater or less than. Okay. And if you note that for the null hypothesis, for directional for directional relationship, the rho is equal to 0. Similarly, the mean difference between A and B variables is equal to 0. This is basically the same, and it stays same with the non-directional. Null hypothesis will not change. It will be the same notation will be used for directional, and same will be used for the non-directional, meaning the null hypothesis will always say that the relationship between the two is and it does not exist. Rho does not exist. The relationship does not exist. In any case, in directional or non-directional, when we're saying relationship and we're saying null hypothesis, then we're saying the relationship between two variables is equal to 0. In either if it's directional or non-directional, it will be same. It will say the same. It will be the same. Rho is equal to 0. Similarly, for null hypothesis, when we're saying that there is a group difference, we're basically in the null hypothesis statement we say there is no difference between the two groups, then we are saying that the mean between A is equal to mean of B. Similarly, mean of A is equal to mean of B for non-directional. So they will not change. The null hypothesis notations will not change for group difference or for relationship. They will be the same. The only thing you need to keep in mind is that in the directional and the non-directional, well, the relationship is we are saying that the rho or the value of P here is not equal to 0, meaning it's not 0, hence it's not 0. It is not 0. It's not 0. It could be positive. It could be negative. Similarly, when you look at the group difference, we're saying they are not equal. We're saying they are different. So they could be more than each other, or they could be less. Any of them. One could be more than the other, or the other could be less from the group B. So coming back again, let's look at this again, the whole thing together. We're saying that the relationship, and there are hypothesis statements which are written in the form of relationship or in the form of group differences. They could be written in the form of a directional or non-directional. For the null hypothesis relationship, the notations are the same, which is rho is equal to 0, rho is equal to 0. Regardless, it's directional or non-directional. The hypothesis, the notations are the same. Same goes for the notations for the group difference. We're saying that there isn't the difference. They are equal. They are equal, meaning the mean of A is equals to mean of B, or mean of A is equals to mean of B. So the null hypothesis is same for direction, non-direction. The difference is when we're saying that the relationship is positive or negative, that's directional, or non-directional. We're saying they're not equal to 0, meaning the relationship exists, but you're not sure about if it's positive or negative. And you're saying in this case, you're saying the groups are different from each other. The mean of A is not equal to the mean of B, meaning they are different, which is your alternate hypothesis. And in the null hypothesis, we're saying they are the same. See? So here we're saying they are the same. we're saying here the same, here we are saying they are different. So in alternate hypothesis we are saying they're different, in null hypothesis we are saying the same. So these are the different notations you can use, and here you can summarize the different types of relation and the types of hypothesis statements one can see. Okay, so with this we move on, and what we do is, again, we'll take up another example which we had looked up earlier in one of our sessions. In this example, if you remember, what we talked about was that we said that workforce diversity that affects the organization effectiveness through creative synergy. Through creative synergy, we said an organization which has a diversified workforce, once they work together, there is creative synergy generated, and this creative synergy produces effectiveness, organization effectiveness. And we also said that this creative synergy will be only created provided there is managerial expertise to handle this workforce diversity. So the workforce diversity, we said, is useful. The relation is useful to become is useful in a way that it can be converted into creative synergy, provided that you have managerial expertise. So we're saying if you have the managerial expertise, which yes, then this relationship is okay. But if the managerial expertise does not exist, then we are saying the relationship will not exist. So this relationship we see is being moderated by this particular variable. So this relationship can be changed. The relationship can be changed, and we said that this workforce diversity is converted, is transformed into creative synergy, and this synergy then basically helps us have more of organization, achieve more organization effectiveness. So if you remember this thing, what we'll do is, based on this our theoretical framework, we again are going to develop some hypothesis statements and see how we go about that. So we said that we identified the workforce diversity is transformed into creative synergy, which leads to organizational effectiveness. We also said that the synergy would be possible when the organization have experienced managers to handle. So this is the case we had already talked earlier. And based on this information, the hypothesis statements which we want to develop could be that the workforce diversity is related to creative synergy. That's hypothesis 1. We are saying hypothesis, which is the alternate hypothesis, saying HA, that the workforce diversity is related to creative synergy, which is workforce diversity is related to creative synergy. So we're trying to test this relationship. Okay? Via this hypothesis. So when we give this statement, this is a statement, hypothesis statement, another, and we want to prove this hypothesis statement. So we want to test that the workforce diversity is related to creative synergy. Here again, if you can see, is this a directional or non-directional type of hypothesis statement? So what do you think it is? Yes, it is directional. We are saying, sorry, it's non-directional here, because we're not saying, we're saying they are related. They are related, but we're not saying that they are positive. We're not saying that there is a negative. It's a non-directional kind of a hypothesis statement. Okay. So this is a non-directional type of a hypothesis statement. We are saying they are related, but we're not sure if it's positive or negative. Okay. Another hypothesis statement which could be generated: the higher the creative synergy, the more the organization effectiveness is. So this is an example of what? A directional kind of a hypothesis statement. Correct? Because we're saying the higher, we're using the word here, and we're saying more. So this is an indication of the direction. In case I had, if in case the theory was different, if I used the word here, less. If I had used the word less here, then of course this is a directional way of it, but it's a negative direction we're saying, which is not the case actually. The case is that there is a positive relationship. So we're saying the more, the higher the creative synergy, the more the organization effectiveness is. So it's a directional kind of hypothesis statement, and it's giving that there is a positive relationship. Okay. In case it's less, then it becomes a negative relationship hypothesis statement. Let's look at the third hypothesis, which could be created, generated, is the creative synergy mediates the relationship between workforce diversity and organization. So we are saying that synergy mediates between workforce diversity and organization effectiveness. Okay. So we're trying to test the relationship, the mediating role of creative synergy, or the intervening role of the creative synergy. So this hypothesis statement is trying to bring about and bring into our attention that there is the intervening variable is intervening or mediating between the relationship. This is the way you state your mediating hypothesis. There's another one. The relationship between workforce diversity and creative synergy is moderated by the managerial expertise. This is an example of how we state the moderating role of it. When we look at it, we're saying the relationship between workforce diversity and creative synergy is moderated by the managerial expertise. So three variables. We're looking at workforce diversity, creative synergy, and we're saying managerial expertise is basically moderating the relationship as per the diagram, that it is moderating. So this is the way you state your moderating. So we looked at the directional kind, non-directional kind of a way. We looked at the directional kind of way. We looked at the mediating and the moderating type of hypothesis statements. Let's have another look at an example. Okay, this example is slightly more detailed. The objective here again is two things. One, we want to make sure that while developing our theoretical framework and then the hypothesis statements, we need to concentrate not only just on developing a schematic diagram, but we need to also properly logically define the relationships. And so in this example again, we deliberately are going through and read through that how the variables are linked and the relationship being indicated. So please let's read it together and see what it says. We're saying that there are 4 independent variables: job level, age, length of service, and the pride in working of the organization influences the organization commitment. So he's saying there are 4 independent variables, which are job level, age, length of the service, and pride in work of organization influences the organization commitment. So while reading this, what is your dependent variable, if I would ask? In this case, the ultimate dependent variable is your commitment, organizational commitment. And what are the independent variable we're looking at here at this accordingly? This is job level, age, length of service, and pride of the working in the organization are the different independent variables. The literature further on says that the person holding highly responsible position, which is the job level, we are elaborating on, if you see the job level. What do we mean by that? We're saying the person holding high responsible position tend to get committed to the organization since they help shape the organization through their policies. So he's saying that people who are at higher level job levels, they are more committed because they help shape the organization through policies and decision making, because they are involved in decision making. So further on, he says generally older persons tend to be more loyal to the place where they work, since opportunities do not to move to other organizations is less. So now again here he is trying to develop the relationships. Here he identified the variables. Here he's trying to look at the different relationship, but he's trying to look at and define logically what is the link between these different variables. Here he's trying to establish the link between position and organization commitment, and here is identifying the relationship between age and between the older, that is age, and the commitment to the organization. Those who read further on the review or literature review, the theoretical framework suggests that those who have served for a long time in the organization would also be more loyal to the organization, which he considers as the intervening variable. So here we are trying to indicate that loyalty is somewhere as an intervening variable. So the longer you serve, he's trying to say the more loyal you are, and the more loyal you are, the more committed you will be on the organization. So this is how he's trying to build. This is how he's trying to build the logic. So I want you to understand that again, while writing a theoretical framework, you need to logically define the relationships and indicating what are the sort of relationship they have within each other. And so then it says, hence get committed to the organization. So this is where he's coming out clearly. He's saying that longer the service, the more loyal they are, the more loyal they are, the more they're committed. So you see that link, you see the link here that is saying the longer their service, the more loyal they are, the more loyal they are, the more committed they are. So here he's trying to link between the. If one is proud of being member of the, naturally the individual is loyal. Again, he's establishing the more proud you are, the more loyal you are, the more loyal you are, the more you're committed are. Again, this is again he's elaborating on that. So the longer employees work for the organization, the more they will have to tend to feel that they are integral part of the organization and feel that they belong to it. These feelings in turn will develop sense of loyalty. Again, there's another argument he's trying to make. He's trying to develop the logic, the link between the duration of stay with loyalty and attachment to the system, and then loyalty. He's saying loyalty is developed, commitment to stay in the organization is there. So again, goes back and forth, and talks about the variables, the relationship with each other, and he moves on to it. And then he says that, however, the higher positions, pride in work for organization, age, and length of service would not be instrumental in developing the organization loyalty of such members as have great adventurous spirit. So that he's now becoming a bit more tentative here and more caution here. He's saying people who are more adventurous spirit, that is, have great desire to move on from one job to the other, these variables will not act the way they are generally. So now he's conditionally explaining that before these are the variables, this is the kind of relationship we'll see, but then he's qualifying that people who have a more adventurous kind of a nature, who like to keep on moving from one job to the other, this kind of relationship will not be proven. And for this word he's using, for this kind of people, he's using the word lust for job hopping, meaning you want to keep on switching jobs because you have that adventurous nature, you want to explore. And these kind of people, for them, the variables which he had earlier described and their relationship will not hold true. So here he's trying to qualify or give as a case. So he says It would not be lust for job hopping would be moderating the, he's saying is moderating the variable which influences the relationship between independent variables and intervening variables, and thus the relation between independent variables and dependent variables. So this is how you need to elaborate, and this is once you are able to elaborate that, then you basically come down and discuss the different variables. Draw your schematic diagram and try to explain in the diagram that what sort of kind of relationships there are. So I was saying that people with high job level, with age, the higher the age, the length of service, the pride of work with, he says all these variables influence are basically transformed into loyalty, and then loyalty is affected by loyalty is then affected the organization commitment. So we're saying the higher the job level, the more the age of the employee, the longer the length of the service, the more pride an individual takes. All these variables are converted into the loyalty, and then once this loyalty is then converted into your organization commitment. But then, and here again, if you can see that it's been indicated as the intervening variable, whereas these as your independent variables, and this is your dependent variable. And then, whereas he's discussed that people who keep on job hopping or they have adventurous nature, for them, he's saying this is considered as a moderating variable. He says this relationship between this and these all relationships are affected by this variable. So job level, age, length, when we're trying to see the link between loyalty and job level, age and loyalty, length and loyalty, pride and loyalty, they will have a problem when we have employees which have high lust for job hopping and low lust for job hopping. So generally, when you have a high lust for job hopping, these relationships will not be seen as they are right now. These relationships will not be seen, and these relationships will not exist because of this variable, which is trying to change. So it's moderating. So people who are having hopping the jobs, have a high job hopping nature, then these things will not cease to exist. So once we are able to done with your schematic diagram, the different hypothesis statements which you can formulate are: the more loyalty, the higher the organization commitment. So this is one of the hypotheses, HA. The other one, HA2, could be the loyalty acts as an intervening variable between job level, age, length of service, pride of work of the organization. We're saying this variable intervenes. So this is a high level of hypothesis statement, which can be further broken down into sub-level of hypothesis statements, generally elaborating on the main hypothesis statement, which is separately, that is, loyalty mediates the relationship between age and organization commitment. Loyalty intervenes a variable. Here we defined all the variables in one hypothesis. Here we defined them in sub-hypotheses, which are much easier to prove, because generally if we try to prove this hypothesis, the problem with this hypothesis is that maybe you might be able to prove hypothesis with these two variables, but not with maybe this variable or that variable. So in this case, if two variables are proven and two variables, then you might have that you might say that the hypothesis is partially proven. But to properly test, and then it is ideally that you should state these sub-hypotheses, which could be tested separately, like this. Say loyalty mediates the relationship between age and organization commitment. Again, loyalty mediates the relationship between the length of service and organization commitment. So what we have done here is in the subs areas, like similarly, again the relationship between, we are saying the relationship between job level and organization commitment. So we're again looking at the three variables separately. Loyalty, relationship between pride of the working condition, and organization commitment. So all these variables are, which we defined in our hypothesis 2, has been broken down to 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4. You see, the logic behind that is that once you might be able to define your hypothesis, like we have done that in the hypothesis 2, where we have defined all the variables, and we have trying to see that there is trying to say that there is a relationship between these variable, or there is an intervening relationship of loyalty between these variables. But to test, we need to ideally separate these hypotheses in different statements, so that we can separately see if this is true, holds true, maybe this does not hold true, and this holds true, and this does not hold true when we collect the data and apply our statistical test. Then separately what we could do is, then we could say, okay, we tested this statement based on the data we received and applied some statistical test. This was proven to be true, this was proven to be wrong, so this was proven to be right, and this one was proven to be wrong. So we would say that some the hypothesis 2A was partially supported. Why? Because some of the sub-hypotheses were supported, and some of the sub-hypotheses were not supported. So this is one way of stating your hypothesis statements. But ideally, always try to break it up into sub-hypotheses, which are much easier to address, like HA 2.1, HA 2.2. Addressing them separately, testing them separately will make your life easy and more clear as to what part of the hypothesis has been proven and what part of the hypothesis has not been proven. Okay. Similarly, we have done the same thing with your moderating variable. We are saying that only employees who have a lust for job hopping would job level, age, length of service, pride, working condition be related to loyalty for the organization. So here again we're trying to see that lust for job hopping would moderate the relationship between job level and loyalty. So we separately, here we have stated them all together, but then we have said HA 3.1, this is 3, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, etc. So what we do is we break it down into sub-hypotheses and separately test them. Again, we're saying moderate lust for job moderates the relationship between age and loyalty, moderate the relationship between job level and loyalty, length of service and loyalty. So we're saying lust for job hopping, it moderates these different relationships. We're saying this, we're testing these. So all of them are being separately formulated, separately stated, because we are trying to get and trying to test that if this is right, if this is not right, if this is right separately. Using using the data and using the tests, we separately test these statements and try to see if this is proven, this is not proven, this is proven. Okay, we talked a lot about the relationship type of hypothesis statements, and in that we talked about some relationship where the relationship were non-directional, some were directional, and then again we looked at some statements which were addressing moderating, testing the moderating relationship of a variable, mediating relationship of variable. Let's have a look on how the group difference hypothesis statements would be formulated in our for this particular example. Let's say that the research question for again this particular exercise or this problem which we were talking about is, does the blue collar workers are more loyal or white collar workers? So let's say while going through the while going through the case or the scenario or the problem, we wanted to also know that loyalty. Once we wanted to know the loyalty level of men versus women, or blue collar versus white collar employees. For that, if you want to establish that who are more loyal, meaning men are more loyal, or women are more loyal, or blue collar workers are more loyal, or white collar workers are more loyal. If this is something also we want to establish, and they have the statements for that. Now the research question for that will be: does blue collar workers are more loyal or white collar workers? So this is the research question, and this could be converted to find the answer for this question. They have the statement could be: there is a difference between the loyalty level between blue collar workers, that is the labor, and the white collar workers, that are the officers. So based on whatever the literature we have, the question which arises in our mind is that which of the two groups are more loyal. So we could say there is a difference between the loyalty between the two, but again between the blue collar worker, that is the labor, and the white collar. So this is where we're trying to see that there is a difference between the two groups, and you're saying you're not sure as to who has more loyalty. We want to test that. So this is a hypothesis statement for that. And here again we're trying to say there's a difference between the loyalty level between blue collar workers, and we're saying there is a difference between them. Okay, so we're saying there's a difference between the two, and we're not saying if blue collar workers are more loyal or white collars are more loyal. The hypothesis statement is just saying there is a difference between them, and we need to establish that. For that, we need to collect data and then apply our statistical test. And once we apply that test, we will be able to establish if this statement was true or not. Okay, once we have established our hypothesis statements, we would like to state our null and alternate. We have already done that. As we have stated our null and alternate hypothesis statements, we need to choose the appropriate test. As I said earlier, that once we collect our data, we need to also see that what kind of hypothesis tests are we could use. But by looking at the statements also, we could more or less get an idea that what kind of tests we can apply. Some of these tests are called the parametric kind of a tests, such as the Pearson correlation, the t-test, the ANOVA test, and then there are certain non-parametric tests like Spearman rank correlations, Kendall, chi-square types of tests, which could be applied on the data collected, but based on the kind of statements we have made, we need to basically select one of these types of tests to apply. More detail on these different types of tests will be covered in the statistical portion of this course. But at this stage, we would like to say that again, for any kind of these tests, we need to establish the significance level. And as we discussed in the last session, that you set in social sciences, generally we tend to set the significance level to 0.05, which is saying that 95 out of 100 you say that the data, the hypothesis received is going to be true, and 5% is not going to be true. This is what we need to say, and usually we set this while conducting the test. Usually while conducting these tests, what we tend to do is we tend to use some kind of a softwares. SPSS is one software which we'll be using towards the end of the course, and basically it generates certain outputs, and within those outputs you will be able to find out the value for the significance level, which will basically establish if there is a difference between the two groups is significant enough, and from those outputs we will be able to see if the relationship is significant enough or not. But basically by studying the output of these kind of softwares, we'll be able to establish the difference or the relationship significance levels as well. That is, if the difference or the relationship is not significant, basically what we'll do is we will accept the null hypothesis, otherwise we'll accept the alternate. What I mean by that is that when the relationships are not significant, basically, then we accept the null hypothesis and we reject the alternate hypothesis. In case we are using not the software, but we are using certain tables, statistical tables. What we do is we check the calculated value of the variables which we were running, and we try to compare it and see if the values are larger than the critical values. The null hypothesis is rejected and the alternate hypothesis is accepted. That is, if the calculated values are larger than the critical values, then the null hypothesis will be rejected and the alternate hypothesis will be accepted. A detailed example again will be covered, as I said, later on this point, but here we are trying to just introduce the concept that once the data is collected, we apply the statistical tools using software or manually, whatever the scenario might be. We basically see if the relationship or the difference between the two groups is significant enough, and for that the output of the software or by using the tables and the guidelines of the tables, we are able to establish that the results which you are getting are indicating if the relationships is significant or not, or the group difference are significant or not. But nevertheless, we basically try to establish all these relationships or the differences with you helping of some kind of statistical tool, which we will go in detail and in the later part of the course. Let's talk about two other types of hypothesis statements, a general, which is not from the general flow of the scenario, which we have discussed. One case is when we say we use deductive or inductive hypothesis testing. Generally, when we say the deductive, the hypothesis is generated and tested, can be done through either deductive or inductive way of hypothesis testing. In the deduction way, what we do is we first develop the theoretical framework, then generate the hypothesis. Data is collected and then hypothesis is tested. This is the typical way of testing the hypothesis, as we have discussed in the last two sessions. So most of the discussion we had was on the deductive way of hypothesis testing, in which prior to testing the hypothesis, what we do is we generate a theoretical model, which basically is supported by your literature. This model, once we develop this theoretical model, then we based on the theoretical model, we develop our hypothesis statements, as we've been doing for the last two sessions, and then we collect the data and use some statistical tools to test if the hypotheses are true or not. But there is another way of testing the writing the hypothesis statements, that is called the induction way. In this, new hypotheses are generated based on the data already collected. So it's the inverse way of it. We briefly talked about it in our session 1, that there are two approaches: the inductive approach or the deductive approach for research. As we said, in the deductive, we have a theory, we formulate the theoretical framework, we develop our hypothesis statements, we collect data, and we basically apply tests to see if the hypotheses are true. But in the inductive, what we do is we already have a data, and based on the data, we try to generate the hypothesis statements, which then are later tested, meaning the data is already there. By analyzing the data, what we do is we try to generate some kind of hypothesis statements based on the data available. And then basically test the hypothesis, and this particular method is called the inductive way of it. If you can recall, one such case was discussed of the Hawthorne studies, in which initially the researchers wanted to establish the link between the light intensity and the work performance. In that, basically, the theory was that the better the light intensity is, the more the output of the employees are. But while collecting the data, what they found out was that this relationship was not established, and they were all perplexed. They were all confused that why did not. So while studying the data, they also came up and analyzing the data which was already collected, which did not prove the hypothesis. Even though the light was low, what they found out, the people were performing better. Actually, they were performing good, and even sometimes in certain cases they were even performing better, meaning the light did not have any effect on the performance, which was very confusing for these people. But later on, when they went in detail and studied the data, and studied the pattern, they realized that it was not, I mean, light did have, but they understood that it is the importance given to these people sometimes which pushes them to perform better. Even though light was bad, people kept on performing better because they felt they were important, they were given certain attention. So from there, new theories were formulated which indicated that fine, environment does in fact influences the output, but it is also the importance who you give to the workers. So this portion where they came out to know if the importance, by giving importance, employees perform better. This is again an example of the deductive, the inductive way of hypothesis development, in which the data was already there, and the previous hypotheses were not being proven, had not been proven, which were basically based on some certain deductions. Now from the existing data, they started analyzing the data, and they realized, they induced that that it is something else other than the availability of light or presence of the environment, good environment. There is other things like maybe important. So new hypotheses were formed, and then the hypotheses were tested, and then the hypotheses were tested using statistical data, statistical softwares, statistical tools, and the hypothesis were proved significantly. So whatever the new hypotheses were developed after data collecting, and these were based on the induction. So creative insight might compel researcher to test new hypotheses, okay, and substantiate, which will help substantiate or add more knowledge to the body of knowledge of that particular area. Okay. So we said that one way of developing hypothesis is the inductive way of hypothesis developing. There is another way we develop hypothesis, which is called the qualitative way of hypothesis development, which is the negative case analysis. In this, basically, the hypothesis hypothesis testing can be done also by testing with qualitative data. Previously, when we said that all the hypotheses which we created, the data we wanted to collect were more of the quantitative of nature, such as when we're saying when we're looking at the performance as a variable, when we're looking at the age of an employee. These are all types of quantitative data, and by the help of this quantitative data, what we do is we try to establish the link between the different variables. But in certain cases, we use what we call as a qualitative kind of a data to prove. One example is as follows. Let's look at this. This is after an interview, what we develop a theoretical framework that unethical practices by employee are a function of their ability to discriminate between right and wrong. So after certain interviews, what has happened, because now in this case your source is qualitative data, because generally in interviews you don't have some quantitative information but of qualitative nature. So in the qualitative thing, you are able to develop a theoretical framework that unethical practices by employees are a function of the ability to discriminate between right and wrong, or due to the need for money, or there being indifferent, the indifference of the organization to them. So while discussing, while interviewing, you find out that the employees they have unethical practices, and these unethical practices are influenced because the employees cannot differentiate between right and wrong, or maybe they are in need of some money and that's why they go for unethical practices, or if they feel that the organization is indifferent to whatever they do and they feel that the organization doesn't care whatever they do, then they will go for some unethical practices. Now this is the theoretical framework which could be based on the interviews. Now searching toward proving this hypothesis could lead us to some false results. That is, we might find that this is not true, and we don't find no support for that kind of the framework, that is the three variables we said would influence the unethical behavior, and we don't find any support for that. So in that case, where the individual is deliberately, we find that in one case we found that there is still there are some people or some individuals who deliberately engage in ethical practice, even though he is able to discriminate from right and wrong, and is also needing money, and the organization is not indifferent. This is when you come across and say, wait a minute, what is wrong? Our theory said that if the individual does not know what between right and wrong, he will go for an unethical practice. If we say the theory said that if the individual needs money, then he will go for an unethical practice. And the theory said that if the organization is indifferent to his way of doing things, then again he will go for unethical practices. The theory says that, but in reality they found out the case that there were individuals who, although they knew what is right from wrong, they had no need for money, and the organization was very critical of the way people behaved. Still they found that people would, or individuals would go for unethical practice. On further probing, what they might be able to find out is that the individual who practiced this unethical way of unethical practices did that because he wanted to get back to the system. He wanted to, he wanted to show the system because the system would not listen to his advice, and to get back to their system, to punish the system, he used unethical practices. Now this is something very unique and a new discovery for you, and that is again what we call as a negative case analysis, where the original theory indicated something different, but you found out that there were cases where a completely different thing happened, which is, even though these variables seem to relate to unethical behavior, but still people would involved in unethical behavior because of another completely different reason, which could be that they want to get back or to punish the system because the system will not listen to their advice. So that's another thing which comes across, and this is how you say, you know that this is what we call as a negative case method, and this enables us to revise this. So there's another way of flow. This is another way of establishing new hypotheses and revising our theories. So we looked at, so far what we looked at was that what are the different hypothesis notations, correct? We looked at that mu, that is mean. Mean of a group A versus mean of group B is obtained to, or these notations are used to indicate the difference between the groups. Rho or small p is used to indicate the relationship between the two groups. We also looked at that how the moderating and mediating hypothesis statements are formulated. Then we looked at the different steps of how to conduct the hypothesis statement tests. Later on in the last session, what we basically looked at was that apart from the typical deductive way of hypothesis development and hypothesis testing, there is an inductive way of method of hypothesis development and hypothesis testing, and there is what we call as a qualitative way of hypothesis testing. In both the cases, these are basically helping us to extend the normal knowledge and extend the typical knowledge to the forming new theory and expanding the horizon of our research. So we said that in the last section that when we find that the hypotheses we had already developed based on the deductive method were not proven, we further analyze the data, and based on the availability the kind of data, by analyzing the data we develop our new hypothesis, which basically add to our understanding of the issue, gives us a new dimension, hence creating new kind of a new kind of knowledge, and this kind is basically called an inductive. Similarly, again, while going through the data, some qualitative input can indicate qualitative detail of a case could indicate a new dimension, a new variable, indicating a new hypothesis, and testing the hypothesis, the previous hypothesis, and identifying that the previous knowledge has lacked something, has been now incorporated, new knowledge has been incorporated, and the previous knowledge has been extended. So this is what we talked about today. Next session, what basically we will look at is how we go about conducting our research and design. That is, once we have able to establish our hypothesis statements, we are aware that once we have the statement established, we need to collect data, and we need to also see statistically identify and see how we're going to test those hypothesis statements. And the next step is we need to now logically or actually systematically plan as to how we're going to conduct our research, what we want to do, how we're going to conduct research in the next session or the next part of our research process, and that is basically termed as the research design. And the next session, inshallah, we will talk about that. Assalamu alaikum.